The numbers are clear. Diverse teams often outperform. More innovation, better decisions, higher profits. But what if none of that mattered? What if the real reason to build an inclusive workplace isn't about the bottom line at all? What if it's simpler, more fundamental? What if it's just about what's right?
That's exactly where we're going today, James. For too long, the conversation around workplace diversity has been dominated by the business case. We've heard all the stats, seen the reports linking diversity to financial success, and while those are important, they can sometimes overshadow a much more foundational question, the ethical one. Is it simply right to treat all individuals fairly, regardless of their background?
And that's a powerful shift in perspective, Oliver, because while the economic arguments for diversity are compelling, relying solely on them feels transactional. It implies that if the numbers didn't pan out, the ethical imperative would somehow vanish. But as we discussed in Business and Society, organizations don't exist in a vacuum. Their decisions ripple outwards, and today we're really focusing on that ripple, asking, what is the right thing for organizations to do when it comes to diversity and inclusion?
Precisely. Consider a very simple scenario. Two candidates apply for the same job. Identical degrees, similar work experience, they both nail the interview. But one gets the job, not because of their qualifications, but because the hiring manager has a personal preference for people from a certain ethnic background. Most people would instantly say that's unfair. And the reason they say it's unfair is because it ignores merit. It allows bias to creep into a process that should be objective. That's ethics in action right there. It's asking what is morally right, not just what's easiest or cheapest.
So the core of this ethical approach is really about fundamental principles like fairness and respect, almost independent of the commercial outcome. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity of every individual, isn't it?
Absolutely. When organizations embrace diversity ethically, they're essentially saying that every individual deserves to be treated with dignity, fairness, and respect. Opportunities should be based on ability, on merit, not on gender, race, religion, disability, age, nationality, or any other personal characteristic that has no bearing on one's capacity to do a job. It sounds obvious when we put it that way, but history shows us it's been a profound struggle to achieve.
And the historical context really underlines that. You only have to look back a few decades to see blatant examples where entire groups of people were systematically excluded from professions or denied opportunities based purely on characteristics completely unrelated to their competence. It wasn't even hidden. It was often enshrined in policy or openly practiced.
Exactly. Women were prevented from entering certain fields. Some companies outright refused to hire individuals from particular ethnic or religious groups. People with disabilities were often overlooked because of deeply ingrained assumptions about their capabilities, assumptions that were frequently unfounded. While we've made significant strides, the UN Women Report reminds us that these inequalities haven't simply vanished. They've evolved, often becoming more subtle but no less damaging.
You're talking about things like women still facing discrimination in leadership, economic resources, and wages, despite their enormous contributions across various sectors. That's a stark reminder that the ethical fight isn't over.
It's a critical point. Women are entrepreneurs, employees, farmers, caregivers. They contribute immensely, yet they remain disproportionately represented in insecure, low-paying jobs and face persistent barriers to leadership and asset ownership. This illustrates that diversity isn't just about optimizing our workforce for better business performance, which is a valid but secondary point. Fundamentally, it's about correcting unfair systems. It's about dismantling structures that have historically prevented vast numbers of talented individuals from reaching their full potential, not just for their own good, but for the good of society as a whole.
So it's not just about what a business gains from diversity, but about the inherent wrongness of exclusion. This really resonates with what we've previously discussed about stakeholder theory, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, James. Recall that stakeholder theory posits that businesses have responsibilities to a much broader group than just shareholders. Employees are a primary stakeholder group. And what do employees expect? It's not just a salary. They expect fair treatment, equal opportunities, respect, safe working conditions, and honest leadership. When an organization consistently fails on these fronts, when employees observe discrimination or unfairness, a corrosive process begins.
You mean trust starts to erode, and once trust is gone, everything else seems to follow.
Exactly. Trust is the bedrock. Without it, motivation plummets. People stop sharing innovative ideas. Collaboration becomes difficult, even painful. Your best employees, those who are most talented and have options, start looking elsewhere. This isn't just an internal problem. It can eventually impact customer perception. Consumers are increasingly discerning about the ethical practices of the companies they support. This is why ethical leadership isn't a luxury, it's fundamental. It understands that fairness isn't optional, it's the very foundation upon which a healthy, resilient organization is built.
Let's take another example to illustrate that point. Imagine two employees, both consistently excellent performers. One is regularly invited to leadership meetings, groomed for promotion. The other, despite similar output, is never considered because management believes younger employees are more energetic. What message does that send over time?
It's devastating. It tells the experienced employee that performance, which they've dedicated themselves to, doesn't actually matter. Their value is being judged not on their contribution, but on an arbitrary characteristic like age. This isn't just disheartening for that individual. It signals to everyone else in the organization that the system isn't fair. Why should they strive for excellence if their efforts can be dismissed for reasons beyond their control?
And the fallout goes beyond that one person, doesn't it? The organization loses access to valuable knowledge, experience, institutional memory. It fosters cynicism. It illustrates how an unethical decision, though seemingly isolated, can ripple through an entire company, harming its collective intelligence and commitment. It almost becomes a self-inflicted wound.
It absolutely does. This highlights a crucial dynamic we see frequently in business and society. Ethics and business success often reinforce one another. Doing the right thing in the long run often proves to be good business as well. You retain talent, foster innovation, build a stronger reputation. But the primary driver should be the ethical imperative, not just the potential profit. The ethical choice leads to better business outcomes, rather than being contingent on them.
So, to crystallize what we've explored so far, we're moving beyond a purely performance-driven view of diversity to one rooted in fundamental ethical principles. This ethical approach demands that organizations acknowledge and address systemic inequalities, treat employees as critical stakeholders, and recognize that fairness is the bedrock of trust and sustainable success. It's a shift from "can we afford diversity" to "can we afford not to be ethical about diversity?"
That's an excellent summary, James. And building on that, another ethical principle deeply intertwined with diversity is the respect for human dignity. At its core, every employee wants to feel valued. No one wants to walk into work each morning wondering if they'll be judged because of how they look, where they come from, or what they believe. It's a basic human need to belong, to be seen for who you are and what you contribute.
This brings us back to the distinction between diversity and inclusion, which we touched upon earlier. Diversity is about the numbers, the composition of your workforce. Inclusion, as you're describing it, is about the experience of belonging. It's the difference between being invited to the party and actually being asked to dance.
Precisely. Imagine being the sole person from a different country in your department. Everyone else speaks a language you barely understand, or they have inside jokes that exclude you. Lunch conversations consistently pass you by. Important decisions are made informally, perhaps after meetings without your input. No one is intentionally malicious or insulting, but over time you start to feel invisible. You're technically employed, you have a desk, but psychologically you don't belong. You've been invited to the party, but you're standing in the corner and no one is making eye contact.
That's a very vivid image. It highlights how even without overt discrimination, a lack of inclusion can be profoundly isolating and disempowering. The ethical problem isn't just about deliberate malice, but about passive exclusion.
Exactly. Hiring diverse employees is only the very first step. Organizations have an ethical responsibility to then create environments where everyone feels safe enough to participate fully. This means fostering a culture where employees feel comfortable asking questions, sharing nascent ideas, disagreeing respectfully without fear of reprisal, admitting mistakes as learning opportunities, and genuinely learning from one another. When these conditions are robustly present, organizations tap into the full spectrum of their employees' knowledge and potential, rather than just hearing from the loudest, most confident, or most dominant voices in the room.
And that ties directly into the concept of psychological safety, which is a major topic in modern leadership. It sounds like a buzzword, but its practical implications for an inclusive workplace are enormous.
It's absolutely foundational. Psychological safety doesn't mean employees never experience disagreement or that everyone always agrees. What it means is that employees don't fear punishment or humiliation for speaking honestly, for voicing concerns, or for admitting errors. Think about a project meeting. You've identified a serious flaw, a potential problem that could cost the company thousands, maybe even millions. If you're working in an environment where your manager is known to publicly embarrass or criticize those who bring bad news, you're likely to stay silent. You'll keep that information to yourself to protect your own standing.
Which is disastrous for the company because that problem will eventually surface, likely at a much higher cost.
Precisely. Now imagine the opposite, an environment where your manager actively thanks people for identifying problems early, where mistakes are framed as learning opportunities rather than occasions for blame. Which organization is more likely to improve, to innovate, to avoid costly errors? The second one, by a huge margin. Inclusive organizations deliberately cultivate this type of environment because they understand that innovation, problem-solving, and continuous improvement are utterly dependent on employees feeling safe enough to contribute their full selves, including their critical perspectives and potential solutions.
So, it's not just about being nice, it's about creating the conditions for truth-telling and continuous learning, which are vital for any organization's long-term health. But then, this leads us to the sometimes uncomfortable reality of unconscious bias. Most people genuinely believe they're fair, don't they?
They do. Very few managers wake up in the morning intending to discriminate. Yet, unconscious bias is incredibly powerful because it operates beneath the surface of our awareness. It influences our decisions without us even realizing it. Imagine you're reviewing 50 job applications. One candidate went to the same university as you, shares a similar background. Another comes from an unfamiliar institution, perhaps a different cultural context. Without conscious thought, you might naturally feel more comfortable with the familiar candidate. That comfort might lead you to unconsciously favor them, even if the other candidate is objectively more qualified.
And it's not about accusing that manager of being a bad person. It's about acknowledging that we all carry these inherent biases that can distort our judgment.
Exactly. The goal isn't to shame individuals. The goal is to acknowledge the pervasive nature of these biases and then design systems that mitigate their impact. This is why many organizations are moving towards structured interviews, where every candidate is asked the same questions and responses are evaluated against standardized criteria. It's why diverse hiring panels are crucial so multiple perspectives can challenge individual biases. Ethical organizations don't just rely on good intentions, they proactively design fair systems. They understand that while intentions matter, systemic safeguards are what truly drive equitable outcomes.
This really connects all the dots back to the broader concept of corporate social responsibility, doesn't it? Diversity isn't just one siloed HR issue. It's fundamentally woven into the fabric of what it means to be a responsible business.
It absolutely does. Let's revisit Carroll's pyramid of CSR that we discussed earlier in the course: economic, legal, ethical, and philanthropic responsibilities. Diversity touches every single one of them. Economically, organizations benefit enormously from attracting a diverse pool of talent, which brings varied perspectives and skills, often leading to better problem-solving and innovation. Legally, it's about complying with employment and anti-discrimination laws. These are the non-negotiable baselines.
And ethically, it's about going beyond just what the law requires, right? It's about a deeper commitment to fairness.
Precisely. Ethically, organizations should treat people fairly, with dignity and respect, regardless of what the legal minimums dictate. This is where the right thing to do truly shines. And philanthropically, many organizations extend their diversity initiatives into their communities through various programs: scholarships for underrepresented groups, mentorship programs, partnerships with community organizations focused on equal opportunity. Diversity, far from being a separate niche topic, really acts as a nexus connecting almost everything we've studied in business and society.
So, to orient ourselves once more after discussing individual dignity, psychological safety, and now the comprehensive scope of CSR, it's clear that fostering diversity and inclusion is an ethical imperative that transcends simple compliance or even pure economic gain. It's about building fundamentally better, fairer organizations that contribute positively at every level, from individual well-being to societal progress.
That's a perfect synthesis, James. And to take that societal view even further, the UN Women reading provides a powerful example of how ethics extends far beyond individual workplaces. Their initiatives aren't just about one company's HR policy. They focus on helping women globally obtain decent employment, accumulate assets, participate in economic decision-making, and influence public policy. They also specifically work with the most marginalized groups, rural women, migrant workers, domestic workers, low-skilled women, to increase their economic opportunity and long-term security. This reminds us that businesses are not isolated islands. They are integral parts of larger social and economic systems.
So it's about recognizing that a business has a role, an ethical obligation, to contribute positively to the broader social fabric, rather than just extracting value.
Exactly. Organizations cannot solve every social problem on their own. That's an unrealistic expectation. But they do have a choice. Do they contribute to existing inequalities through their practices, or do they actively work to reduce them? Ethical leadership in this context means consistently choosing the second path whenever possible. It means using their influence, their resources, and their platforms to create a more equitable world, not just a more profitable one.
It seems a common misconception is that diversity initiatives are solely for the benefit of underrepresented groups, like it's an act of charity or social engineering. But what you're describing, and what we've touched on, suggests a much broader benefit.
That's a crucial point, and it's a misconception we absolutely need to address. A truly inclusive workplace benefits everyone. Fair recruitment processes, for instance, don't just help women or ethnic minorities. They ensure every applicant, regardless of background, has an equal shot, fostering a meritocracy that ultimately elevates the quality of hires across the board. Transparent promotion systems benefit every employee by making career progression clear and equitable. Respectful communication and psychological safety don't just help marginalized voices, they improve team dynamics for everyone, leading to better collaboration and decision-making.
So it's not a zero-sum game where one group gains at the expense of another. It's an uplift for the entire organization.
Precisely. Inclusive leadership strengthens the entire organization by tapping into a wider range of ideas and talents. When businesses genuinely treat people fairly, employees are more engaged, more loyal, and perform better. That positive impact extends outwards. Customers notice and appreciate ethical practices, communities benefit from more equitable opportunities, and investors gain confidence in well-managed, future-proof organizations. Ultimately, a stronger, fairer society benefits everyone. So to conclude, managing diversity isn't merely an HR policy to check a box. It is fundamentally a leadership responsibility. And even more importantly, it is an ethical responsibility.
Oliver, that's such a critical reframe. We started by questioning whether diversity's value was purely transactional, and we've landed on the resounding conclusion that it's an ethical imperative, weaving through stakeholder responsibilities, human dignity, psychological safety, and comprehensive CSR. It elevates the conversation from what do we gain to what is right.
And the beauty is, the right path often leads to the most sustainable and beneficial outcomes for everyone involved. It's about building a better, more just foundation for business and society.
Thank you, Oliver, for unpacking these complex ethical layers today. This perspective from UN Women and the entire discussion really underscores how deeply embedded ethics are in the fabric of responsible business. The text we drew from today was Part 2 of Unit 7 of the Business and Society course material.
A crucial read for anyone looking to understand the broader implications of diversity. If this discussion resonated with you, consider sharing this episode with someone who might benefit from hearing it.